I think the most important romantic poet is probably Wordsworth. I mean, I think
very out of fashion at the moment, isn't he? People slightly.
He's an easy poet to dislike.
With daffodils and so on.
Yeah. But he's an easy poet to dislike. I disliked Wordsworth when I studied his work when I was a student, because he can come across as pious and sanctimonious and banal and prosaic and all those things. And also he's got this grotesque ego and everything becomes about him. Yeah. And he also wrote far too long. He should have died in 1805 instead of he limped on for the 45 years. And so this is kind of...
Whereas Keats dying at 25.
Yes, yeah, so it helps with Shelley, Byron, they all die young, and Coleridge wrote all his poetry young pretty much, and so he stopped as well. But whereas Wordsworth kept on going, so there's this remorseless and depressing productivity about him. But I think he's... What's the great mistake about Wordsworth is to think that the great mistake is to think that he's a nature poet.
Yes, that's what people assume him to
He's
be.
not a nature poet. He never looks at anything. He never really looks at a flower. If you want a romantic poet, if you want to see have a poem about what a flower or a bee or something looks like, you'll go to John Clare. Yeah. You don't go to Wordsworth. Yeah. Wordsworth never looks at anything, not really. What he does is he instantly transforms the place he is in into a kind of symbolic vignette of his own imagination, his own fears, his own desires, and so forth. And so I think Wordsworth is best understood not in terms of, say, 19th or 18th century nature, landscape painting. These kind of framed with lots of busy mountains and busy trees. That's not Wordsworth at all. Wordsworth is much more like a 20th century abstract painting in which you get a scene and you kind of wipe out everything apart from one or two tiny things. And so you get, he looks at a scene and what you get is you get this, a piece of grass which is kind of inexplicably clear and lush, and then you get a little tower, and then you get a woman or a girl walking along with a picture on her head, and then you get and that's all you get, and you get those details, that the tower, the grass, the girl with the picture on her head repeats it twice. Or you get another scene where you get a gibbet where someone was hanged years ago. Or you get another scene where you've got a hawthorn bush and a wall and a sheep, and then a hawthorn bush and a wall and a sheep, and that's it. And what you get is some sense that this figure is talking about it, remembering when he was there, and somehow these objects get this strange, uncanny energy.
It's fascinating. So, what is Wordsworth's vision then? What does he believe?
I think he's struggling with the idea of what makes a human being. I think he's racked by semi-understood forms of guilt, and almost the guilt of being alive at all, and grief. I think he's orphaned at a reasonably young age. Then he suffers the death of. Then he has a relationship with this woman in France and a baby, and he abandons them. And then two of his kids die in very quick succession, and his beloved brother dies, and then he has this terrible, violent and distressing severing from Coleridge and so forth. So he's a figure who's defined by separation, by some sense of loneliness. He has a longing for immortality, but he's got this wonderful bit. He's got this this essay on epitaphs, where he talks about how we write epitaphs because we believe in epitaphs. We have epitaphs because we all believe instinctively in our immortality. And if I did not believe in immortality, my personal immortality, then life would be just unendurable. It'd be like walking around like this cold shadow, or a shadow of yourself. And of course, Wordsworth's poetry is endlessly inhabited by that, exactly that, walking around and discovering shadows of yourself. These poems where you get this traveller walking, the poet figure walking along, then suddenly seeing this other strange figure who looks like a sea animal or something, or a sort of half alive, half dead or undead figure who speaks things. All these are kind of doubles for the poet, in the sense that you kind of live in this half light, this kind of life as a shade, and trying to discover what it might mean to be fully alive. And his poetry is all about trying to collect, trying to go back to his past, to try and recover some sense of fullness. So even his most famous poems, like Tintern Abbey, which is often seen as a poem sort of the assertion of the one life. You know, I look at the mountains. It's not that at all. It's a poem which is constantly struggling with despair, with tempted by suicide. I think that poem, for example. I think, you know, and the kind of the melancholy of time passing, the sense of once upon a time I was this and now I'm this, and what does it mean to have lost that me that was there? And so this terrible sense of deficit in life, and the desire to recover that. I think he's I think he's a poet who's very, very easily misread because it's not recognised how whenever Wordsworth is writing with intensity, he's writing, his worlds are symbolic, they're metaphoric, they're not descriptions of what he's actually seeing before his eyes.